Hello, my name's Matt and this is Pixel Burn, where I take a look at some of the more interesting things to have happened in gaming this week in my own overblown, long-winded way. Sleeping Dogs was one of my favourite games of 2012, not least because its Hong Kong setting was a pleasant, refreshing change of scenery from the usual open world fare. It also brought a few things to the table I now find myself missing in other games, such as hijacking moving vehicles from another moving vehicle or pushing someone's face into a bacon slicer during a fight. And it was also nice to play as a protagonist that wasn't yet another generic Whitey McWhitebread. So naturally I'm chuffed to hear it's getting a sequel called Triad Wars, which we'll supposedly get our first look at sometime next year, which gives me plenty of time to replay Sleeping Dogs on my PC with its lovely high resolution texture pack. Speaking of games I love the classic Thief series by the greatly missed Looking Glass Studios, and I've not exactly been impressed by what I've seen of Eidos Montreal's reboot. Thankfully I can now go and download the Dark mod, a recreation of the classic Thief experience in the Doom 3 engine, which is possibly the only game engine actually dark enough to do it justice. Even better, I don't even need Doom 3 to play it, since it's now completely standalone, with all new textures, sounds and other lovely stuff. Oh, and it's completely free too. Naturally, as a huge long-time Thief fan, I went to download it immediately, only I bloody well couldn't, because an influx of other huge long-time Thief fans had overwhelmed the site. There's a torrent available, but it's hosted on Pirate Bay, which is blocked in the UK. Because the British government thinks that torrent sites are only ever used for illicit purposes. They're also too fucking stupid to believe the average British internet user doesn't have ways and means around this shit. Needless to say, I'm downloading it right now. But of course, that takes time. So instead of playing the Dark mod, I'm reduced to watching Eidos' new Thief trailer and trying not to puke up my own guts. Scripted events? In a Thief game? Seriously?
I'm afraid we're going to have to rip a few pages from the Book of Names.
Thankfully, Frictional Games cheered me up with the release of some actual gameplay footage for SOMA, their upcoming sci-fi horror title. Not that I didn't enjoy the two delightfully creepy short horror films they commissioned from Images Films, but I've been itching to see something of the game in action, and this trailer didn't disappoint me. Well, it did a bit, what with it looking a bit like a more modern and brown Amnesia at first. Then the trailer goes into gorgeous HR Giga inspired environments haunted by screeching robots, where terrible things happen to a human brain, and oh god, I want it here and I want it now! Sadly I have to wait until bloody 2015 when it's released on both PC and PS4, giving console owners their first real taste of a proper horror game, besides the PS4 version of Outlast due in 2014. And in other news, Cliff Martinez, the composer of the soundtrack for the movie Drive, is working on Far Cry 4. What's that? You didn't even know Far Cry 4 was in development? Well, thanks to Cliff Martinez, now you do. Yes, Cliff cheerfully let slip that he was working on the game, which hasn't been officially announced yet, in an interview with movie news site Lost in the Multiplex. Naturally, Ubisoft didn't like this, even though we were all pretty much expecting another Far Cry game, given how well Far Cry 3 did. So Lost in the Multiplex has since updated the article to remove all mention of anything video game related whatsoever. You can, however, still go there if you want a picture of Willem Dafoe's O-face, which I'm showing here because I don't want you to sleep tonight. And what better than a naked Willem Dafoe to bring us to Beyond Two Souls, David Cage's latest attempt at forcing the square peg of video games into the round hole of Hollywood. Indeed, Beyond Two Souls launched this week, and reviews for it have been more divided than a man tied to two horses galloping in opposite directions. Even Eurogamer's various continental incarnations can't agree about it, with the Italian arm giving it 9 out of 10 while the German division only gave it a 6. Other sites at the lower end of the scoring divide include Destructoid, Giant Bomb, Joystick, and even The Telegraph, which calls it a mess, albeit a fascinating one. Meanwhile, sites like GameSpot, Digital Spy and Polygon were far more receptive to David Cage's unique brand of auteur-ism, with Polygon in particular praising Beyond's strong presentation and performances. One recurring point of criticism in many reviews, good and bad, was aimed squarely at the game's story, characterization and other narrative elements. See, while Quantic Dream have become quite proficient in the basic mechanics of telling a story within a video game, it's become more apparent that the stories they're telling really aren't that great. Or to be more specific, David Cage is not a good writer. That's not to say he's a terrible one. The opening scene of Fahrenheit, aka Indigo Prophecy, where you wake up in a public toilet standing over someone you've just murdered with no memory of what's happened, is one of the most memorable I've ever played. From there, both the protagonists and the players' notions of what is real and what isn't are continuously tested, threatened and turned upside down, and while things can get quite ludicrously fantastical, there's still enough reasonable doubt there to keep it a bit grounded and stop it getting completely absurd. Alas, not for long. Sadly, the entire edifice crumbles into a big pile of stupid right about here. Yeah, that's not so much a tonal shift as it is a full-blown landslide, and only gets more stupid from there. Hollywood stupid specifically, which leads me to the crux of my main issue with David Cage. David Cage has always struck me as a thwarted movie maker who moved into games simply because the bar for writing quality is set that much lower. Yes, there are lots of shitty movies and plenty of shitty books too, believe me, I know, but the vast majority of video game writing still pales in comparison, next to even the tritest airport bookstore escapism. In recent years, the quality of video game writing has significantly improved, giving us great narrative experiences such as The Walking Dead, The Last of Us, Bioshock Infinite and others, but these are still exceptions to the rule, rather than the norm. The reason for this is too many video game writers still try too hard to ape movies, whether to give their game a sheen of cinematic Hollywood gloss or as part of some deep-rooted desire for games to be treated with the same level of artistic respect. David Cage is the most visible and obvious example of this, trying to force video games into a Hollywood mould while discarding as much as he can of what makes games so enjoyable in the first place, namely their interactivity. The problem with looking to movies for inspiration for video games, of course, is that movies are a passive medium. You pay your money, you sit down and spend an hour or several staring at a screen. You're never once asked to suddenly solve a puzzle or do a handstand before you can watch the next scene, unless it's one of those weird art house theatres in the films and avant-garde murder mystery starring pigs. Because symbolism. A better medium to look to for meshing game mechanics with story would be tabletop role-playing games, which have been wrestling with this problem for longer than video games have. They haven't entirely cracked it yet, of course, but they've evolved numerous theories such as the threefold model, Gen theory, and the Mailati school to try and solve it. Hell, books and comics are more interactive than movies are, even if that interaction is only turning a page or squinting at panels for hidden background details. But then you have things like this from Animorph's Promethea, which requires a tad more effort from its readers than any Hollywood blockbuster asks of its audience. Same applies to this page from the Labyrinth chapters in Mark Z. Danielewski's House of Leaves, which you literally have to navigate almost like a game. This isn't to say video games can't learn anything from movies. I'm merely suggesting they've learned a bit too much and have picked up some bad habits and probably need a stern talking to and a clip round the ear. While I may not be the most ardent admirer of Cage's work, I respect and admire him for at least trying something different from the usual brown modern military wanking party. And if Beyond Two Souls one day inspires a developer to find that perfect tipping point between story and game, then it's something we'll all benefit from. As for me personally, Beyond Two Souls looks to be something I'd rent rather than buy, if I actually had a PS3 and wasn't already watching a Let's Play of it. That's all for this episode of Pixel Burn. I hope you found it enjoyable or at least vaguely tolerable. Feel free to leave a message if you did, or even if you didn't. Either way, you can go now.